Hello, I'm here today with Gaiea Sanskrit.
Hello.
Hello. So, you and I went to school together. Then, after school, took very different routes. You went off to university and studied Sanskrit. So, what on earth made you take that step? How did that come to be?
It's a great question, Jeff. Why did I study Sanskrit? Because I had another option, and I was very drawn to classics, which is Greek and Latin, but Greek in particular, and also very drawn to music and drama. But I basically wasn't good enough at those things, and apart from that, I didn't really want to study anything. There was nothing else to study. It felt not worth it to me personally to go to university. So I wasn't going to go to university. But then something in me felt, if I was to go, truly ask again, I asked myself the question, what would it be from school that I would most like to delve into deeper? And the thing that came to mind whilst I had the chance was Sanskrit. So I just wanted to understand more, in more depth, that language. So that's how it came about.
Right. And so how did that develop then? Because it sounds like you sort of, that's quite a kind of cerebral maybe approach to it. And how did it develop? Because it's now a really big part of your life, and you're doing really interesting things with it. But before we get there, can you say how that developed over time to where you are now?
Oh, Jeff, I love that question because it's been such a big journey. And I think as a person in life, I started off very cerebral. When I say started off, I mean from the ages of about 18 to 25, caught up in the brain. And it's not a bad thing, obviously, because the brain is so powerful, the mind is so capable. And I used a lot of that brain energy, brain power on, just translating reams and reams of text, going into loads of grammar. But then, at the end, even during university, there was something missing that could not give me everything. Even the Sanskrit, especially studying it at university, was not satisfying. So I started to find I was singing much more. I was still playing the piano a lot, and I wanted to be with drama people. I still wanted to be with artists. I couldn't be with academics. I mean, they're great, but I couldn't be with them only. Yeah. So that other side was pulling me. And throughout university, the other side actually won. And even during university, my lecturers would say, this essay is not good enough because you're writing like a journalist. You're writing like a writer would write. We want you to write in an academic way. And I always found that a challenge. It was actually a challenge. So after university, I left academia completely and just went into the explorations that artists do, trying out various things, trying out being on stage, trying out performing. And then that's how it began to develop. Then the two married. They truly married. Before that, they were two very separate things. The really cerebral side that I was grappling with, and the artist in me. And they were two things almost pulling apart. And at some point, they started to intertwine. So
on one side, there's the studying the language, which does have an academic side, doesn't it? You have to learn the grammar and the language. So, and then the artistic side. So can you say more about the artistic side then? Do you consider yourself an artist?
Do I consider myself an artist? Well, my instinctive answer is yes, even though strangely, from the ages again of 18 to about 25, and even after that, I'd say people in the yoga community would look on me as an academic, and I often get looked upon as an academic.
Sorry, when you say the yoga community, what do you mean as yoga as we might know it as the stretches and asanas, like the physical practice of yoga, or do you mean something else?
So I mean in the Western world, the yoga trainings that people go, which is to become an asana teacher, they include the yoga philosophy, and this world is branching out. Obviously it includes kirtanam practice, chanting practice, but in that world, in the West, where I'm often invited to teach, not just in yoga schools but Ayurveda colleges too, I know that those communities would regard me as a Sanskrit academic or a Sanskrit scholar. But in answer to your question, I regard myself as an artist.
So, what are you trying to express as an artist? Can you put that into words?
It's hard to put into words, but it's obviously something we all have wanted to. We all want to express something. Every single one of us. I know that with certainty. And ever since I would say about 17-ish, 18. It was at 18 actually. It came to a point in life where I couldn't just write stuff in a diary anymore. I couldn't just write it as a stream of consciousness. I needed a more solid way to express an emotion I was feeling that I couldn't just cry it out. I needed something tangible to pour this emotion into that was going to be something sort of, I guess to me, of value. And that's when all the work with music began to culminate, and that's when I started writing songs. But this was not in Sanskrit, this was purely in English to express a feeling. And then so I'd say that's how that was the first sort of feeling of being an artist in the sense of a singer-songwriter.
So it sounds like the sort of Sanskrit is the kind of vessel, and you put yourself into it. It helps you express what you want to.
You're saying, what am I trying to express? I'm trying to express my deep inner yearning as a human. Yearning is the easiest word for me to use, but it's a whole, obviously, array of feelings. And coming to the Sanskrit text, like all the stuff I churned out from age 18, I'm going to say right up to 28-ish, that period of 10 years, it wasn't rubbish, but it was like all this stuff pouring forth, like any experience writing it down. And when the Sanskrit became involved, I noticed that it had the power to say something in these texts that I look at so clearly and precisely. All the things I'm longing to say, they can be summed up in a few phrases of Sanskrit, and also the answers to what I'm longing to express. And it almost made some of the English writings I had done from me almost, irrelevant is a harsh word to use, but immature somehow for me. But combining the Sanskrit or using only Sanskrit, I could step into a realm where the other things weren't necessary.
So how do you choose the next chant that you're going to put to music, or how do you choose the next text that you're going to explore? Because it seems to be there's so much of it, isn't there, in the Vedic tradition, in the Sanskrit language tradition.
Yeah, it's never ending, and I'd say that's one blessing for me. If the impetus carries on, if the flame is still alight, the flame of inspiration and creativity, that's one thing I know for sure. Could be singing Sanskrit till the day I drop dead, because there are so many songs to be recorded. And I remember one man, he was actually a mentor for a while who worked in film. He sat in front of me and said, when you're inspired, that's a flame, that's like connected with a flame that's lit. Always nourish that flame, feed that fuel. And lucky with Sanskrit, there's enough fuel to fuel that flame forever. But how do I choose these chants? I would say it's like the cycles of the moon, like the cycles of the seasons. They have a different feeling in every season. And I would say if I was to take a week as a season for me, or every week is completely different, I literally have jumped on some sort of wave, and I trust that whatever I'm feeling connected to or inspired by, like if it's a wish to say thank you for support I've had, or if it's a wish to say connect with a mother, a sense of motherhood, mother energy, or if it's a wish to pray, whatever the wish is, if I'm connected with this cycle of intuition in myself, I sometimes will seek out that chant, like if it's to mother, if it's to earth, whatever it is, or I sometimes just trust that chant will find me. I know that sounds weird, but it happens a lot. Someone will email me a chant, someone will, in a lesson that I'm either teaching or receiving, I'll just hear about this chant. Or sometimes someone's book will be open, or I'm in someone's house and I see the side of a book, could be a teacher's house, and I just feel so drawn to it, and then I go and explore that, and that's a chant. So it's a mixture of being completely organic and going with my my own cycles and intuitions, and what I'm studying is the third point.
So it's interesting that I get a sense then that you're that it's more your exploration of Sanskrit and the creativity, the process you go on, you know, the artistic side of it. But there's also this that it's connected to a sort of personal spiritual practice as well. It's very much a kind of living, embodied thing you do, you know, in your life. Can you say more about that? How does that?
This is
work?
really interesting, because in asking that question, you just reminded me that sometimes on YouTube people will request chants. So there are occasions where it's not coming from me and it's not coming from the creativity, but I still count that as the flow. I count the fact that that request came up in the moment and therefore it's part of the flow. But with regard to like my spiritual practice or journey, would have to go into that into more detail, because
Okay.
it would have to be, in what way is it the spiritual practice or journey? What would you mean? You know, am I sharing?
I suppose that it, you know, it sounds like it's more than just, you know, an output as an artist. You know, these chants really mean something to you. You're taking meaning from them, and you're trying to, you know, you're saying like you're on this intuitive sort of wave. You have a sense of what resonates with you at a given moment. That just has a sound to it, like it's sort of integral to the way you're living life. So it's not just, oh, this is an interesting chant,
No.
and I feel like this would be interesting to explore. It's more than that. You're kind of in it.
Yes, but what you just said is what I feel every art is, even though another art form might not term it as spiritual, like say carpentry, but is to me that spiritual practice, like building the chair, and in the same way building and working on the chant, or singing that song or performing that chant. I know what you mean. It is, they do become, whilst I'm working on them, interwoven, and I connect with the meaning of them. But then it's more the essence that's left over from the vibrations of that chant stay with me somehow. Like, because there's, like we said before, there's so many chants. So if I was always practicing all the chants, it would literally take every day, all day.
I suppose maybe that question partly comes from watching your videos on YouTube. You've got, I just checked, 248,000 subscribers, which is pretty amazing.
Wow,
You know, over a couple of million views on some of these videos, which means that there's a lot of people interested in this. I'd like to come back to that, but watching you do the chant, you seem to go somewhere. You know, you seem to sort of really go into yourself, like, and can you say more about the experience? Where do you go when you're chanting?
You know, Jeff, that is the beauty of, to me, any art. Like mentioned carpentry, like where do you go when you're carpenting the wood, shaping the thing? I feel that's the same for me. It's like I'm sculpting something. It's different to practicing, because practicing for me on a daily basis is not intense, although it
looks intense when you're.
But when I'm in the moment, so as soon as if we're recording a chant for a video, as soon as that button is pressed, something is taking over. Same if there's a chanting session, or same in teaching a workshop. As soon as that workshop is opened, it's like as soon as that bell is rung, as soon as I hear that call, then all the other stuff has disappeared, and that's what to me gives it the intensity. There's no room in my whole body and mind for anything else to be there. And we all experience this in different ways, but for me, one of the prime ways is through these chants and songs. So when that starts, it's for me really like letting go. I've been holding on to something all day. I'm holding on to something, and as soon as we have and recording, I can let go of whatever it is I've been holding on to all day, and I'm free for like a few moments, free for the duration of the. It's emotional.
So do you find if you have to do a number of takes that you can stay there?
That's interesting, because I rarely do many takes. It's very, very rare. Most of the YouTube ones are just one take done, because I would say 90% of the ones on YouTube Some of them have a few cuts because the very, very, very long ones, and there has come a point where we needed to restart, but not from the beginning. But when we do retake, because obviously sometimes you do, in the retakes of the recording, you're pretty much still there because it's never more than 3 retakes tops.
Right.
So the energy, the impetus that has carried on is not broken. It's very much on.
And maybe, well, you tell me, but maybe if it didn't work out and you had to do several takes, maybe it's not the right thing to be doing.
I feel that somehow myself, but I would say it's different working with live musicians, because a lot of the chants you see online, I'm working with just one other guy, Joe, who does them with me. So it's just us two. But if we're talking about, sometimes I do work in a group of more people, and when you're working with live musicians, I feel we need more practice. That's what it is. We need to practice together. So I guess we need to try it out lots more times before we're going to get that.
So it's interesting. There's the kind of inner purity of what you're, trying to stay true to that impulse and keep it fresh. But then there's also the practical business of getting a band rehearsed.
Yes, yeah. And that's why it's very rare I have done these things with a full band or live musicians, because of that, and also obviously time and money that would go into that.
So you think you're doing any live shows, any live performances in the future?
There were definitely some planned before lockdown, and it is a great, great, great wish of mine to do a live show which incorporates some of the new songs from a latest album, last 2 albums actually, and also some of the favourites from YouTube, and to curate a couple of hours, sort of like a theatre experience, and via these chants that people could come and enjoy live. So that's hopefully, it won't be until
London,
20, but
India?
London first, because that's where I am, and then I'd love to bring it to India, USA.
So that brings nicely back to the subscribers and all the hits on your video. I mean, I find it fascinating because we went to school together, and now suddenly you're on YouTube, and you've tapped into something that there's clearly a demand for. People are interested in. Do you have a sense of where, well, first of all, where your audience is around the world? Do you know that?
From the feeling from YouTube, and I don't go into this too much, but from the gist, I have a feeling lots of the audience came from India and are from India, and that's where the original sort of core group of YouTube listeners come from. But now I notice the audience beginning to spread, or perhaps it has always been thus, people in America, across Europe, Russia, Spain, Germany, and now England more, and is there anywhere else? Australia and New Zealand,
And what do you think it is that people are interested in? Why is it gaining popularity?
Do you know, I honestly never planned it. It's like, I don't even remember how the YouTube thing, it's funny because the first YouTube, this channel that is on YouTube now, started off as my comedy channel. And I remember posting one video saying, why have I studied Sanskrit, and just popping it in amongst the comedy stuff, and that video took off. And I remember I was going to the recording studio and recording a Sanskrit song, and it was one of the ones you first heard. I remember you saying Anandamayi Chaitanyamayi Satyamayi.
Oh yeah, and you'd overlaid it a number of times, and it got more and more sort of airy.
More. And that one was one of the first posts on YouTube. And I wasn't planning anything. It was just, I loved that song. I loved that chant, and I loved looping it. Yeah. And that somehow caught on, but I've no idea how it caught on, how it grew, and how it is organic as well. And over a long period of time, it's like 7 years of just continuously sharing what is being worked on. And I think what people are attracted to on the YouTube, especially people I know from India who listen to the songs, the people from India tell me they're attracted to something in the songs calls them to home. And I mean, this is Indians around the world, people from India who are now American or wherever, Indians who have been away from their country for generations, have a feeling of being called back to some home, but it's represented by the motherland. But I think that actually symbolises it's something else. They're feeling like that yearning that I feel the listener is called, and that's all nationalities, not just for all of us. It's tapping into something of that core.
Yeah, I can imagine it might be really interesting if you are Indian to hear your ancient, Sanskrit language being chanted by, a British girl from across the sea in sort of perfect, well, what sounds to me like it's perfect pronunciation, or very carefully done pronunciation. That must be quite arresting, I'd think.
Yeah.
I suppose the equivalent for us might be someone chanting perfect Chaucer or something. Ye olde English.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was interested about the musical is it practice of Dhrupad? Am I saying it right? So that's Dhrupad. Yeah. And so how's that feeding into the work you're doing then?
So over the past 2 years, I'd say I've been visiting Pune to visit a Dhrupad teacher there, who I came across purely by chance, and that's feeding. I would say it hasn't properly fed into this work yet because I'm such a beginner. But one thing it's really given me is a solid voice practice, and it's started to give me assurance in the lower register of the voice, and it started to hold me, if this makes sense, in the realm of physical voice. It keeps me really grounded in the voice, so I can still go high, but there's more of a grounding. And I hope in the long run that it feeds into these creations and songs where I could actually sing a full Dhrupad set, which is it's like you start off very slow, and then you bring some rhythms in, and then you go into a song.
And how long might be a Dhrupad set?
When a great Dhrupad master came to London recently, he was performing on an instrument, not singing, but traditionally it would be 3 hours long.
Oh wow!
But I don't. For me, obviously, I don't think I will go for that long.
Yeah.
But just even incorporate it into a performance.
And is that traditionally the musical form that went with the Vedic chanting, the Sanskrit?
That's an interesting question, because as far as I'm aware, you see, the Dhrupad, which is connected to Samaveda, which is obviously the Vedas, but is not chanting though. It's taking a text and it becomes a song. But the lyrics in Dhrupad come in originally from a Sanskrit word Narayana. But
what does Narayana mean?
It's a word for, you could say, Lord. You can translate it easily as, or Narayana, like the all-seeing eye, or it's like an expression of wonder for what is Narayana, Narayana, Narayana. It's again coming back to that call, that sense of a call. It's like a call of the heart. It's an expression in 5 syllables of the call of the human heart. 4 syllables. Narayana.
And is these chants and this language that you choose, it all seems to have a sort of spiritual basis. Like, if you think about Chaucer, say, I'm not a great Chaucer scholar, but I seem to remember from reading the Canterbury Tales, there's like bawdy things happening in the pub, and like adventures on the road, and sort of stories which are more comic perhaps, and they're just entertaining stories.
Yes.
But everything seem in the chants you do, and the kind of content of the Sanskrit that you're putting out seems to be really profound. A hop, skip and a jump, and it's back at the soul kind of thing. Is that something specific about the Sanskrit language, or is it specifically the parts that you choose, or is it what that relationship between sort of spirituality and Sanskrit? Is that just where you're choosing it, or is that in the language itself?
See, everything you're saying, you're like hitting nails on the head with everything, because I would
Good.
say I am choosing it, but it's also in the language, but yet the Sanskrit language also has the capacity to be super comic and super poetic, and talk about daily beauties like the wonder of women, or the beauty of the hillsides, and the funny stories with animals, insects, birds, kings, court jesters, crazy people. It's got all of that in the literature. But I would address your question from two angles. Firstly, I feel in myself that the sounds of the Sanskrit language, if sounded in a, hopefully correctly, have the capacity to awaken you to your soul. And I could say that's even hearing a beautifully read Sanskrit play, which includes the comedy. But the very sounds, I'm talking about purely the sounds of the language. So that's one aspect. But the other aspect is, I feel, the YouTube creations or the songs that I release online and iTunes, etc., they are all sort of they're specifically spiritual songs and texts. I'm not choosing to, I haven't yet chosen in the Sanskrit songs to sing, for instance, a story, a Hitopadesha, even though those stories have great spiritual morals, but they include the fun and the adventures. I haven't yet chosen to do that, and that's because it's not been the call in me. The call
You're
is
most interested in those things that are more profound or whatever it is. So one other thing I was interested to ask about is this idea of a teacher. It seems that the idea of a teacher, from what little I know of the tradition, the teacher is sort of a presence in in the way that the Vedic tradition is passed on, and you've mentioned teacher a few times, and you also teach. But you consider yourself an artist on one level as well. Do you consider yourself to be a teacher? How does that fit into your relationship with Sanskrit, both in the sense of you having a teacher and you being a teacher?
So the best way to address that is one of the Upanishads in Sanskrit, and I think it's the Taittiriya Upanishad, says, what you know, teach, proclaim, but teach. So what you learn, teach, give it, share it. So in that sense, obviously everyone's a teacher, but in that sense, I would say I am a teacher, because if I compare myself with others, which is always a dangerous thing to do anyway, but I always know I know nothing. Like there's great scholars, great Sanskrit masters, there's great musicians, there's great singers, and I'm just a child exploring in that sense. But so therefore, answering from that perspective, I never say I'm a teacher. But when I know that Upanishad says what you learn, teach, what you know, share, I know that in what little I really, really know and am sure of, I'm happy to share and give. In that sense, I know I am a teacher. And it's, but more and more, I'm enjoying with teaching. I'm enjoying the practice of teaching what I've truly understood. Teaching and I used to teach with a lot of notes. I remember teaching group classes and I'd have the folder of notes, and I've been really enjoying reaching some sort of point where I can trust not to bring anything with me to the class, just sit and share. And the same with one-to-one classes too. I mean, it's taking its time, but I can feel there's a change happening.
And people are interested to learn?
People are interested, surprisingly, because I always wonder but yes, interested to learn the language. Well, I shouldn't really say surprisingly, but it's just fascinating how it might not seem something that's, in many of our day-to-day's existence. Like if we walk down to Peckham Rye Tube, Sanskrit's not going to be in your face. But yet yoga is everywhere, isn't it? So in that sense, if yoga, billions of people are learning yoga, I think it is more and more people are being called to want to know more about the traditions from whence yoga came. And the main part of that tradition is this Sanskrit language.
So you've chosen the name Gaiea as your name that you perform and that you produce these chants with. Tell me a little bit about the word Gaiea. Why that word? Why that name?
Well, it started off when I was with my friend Peter. We were in a cafe, and I was saying to him, there was the first album that was, well, not the first, but one of the albums that was released last year, and I said I really want to. I need a name, a new name, because Gabriella is not who I am when I go into when the button is pressed, play, record, and suddenly together, because Gaiea came up for me as a name, but he said, hey look, your name is Gaiea without the consonants, so, and that's why it's spelt like it is, G-A-I-E-A, Gaiea. So that's one reason, and then it was perfect because the root Gai in Sanskrit is to sing and express through song, and Gaiea is to be sung, that which is to be sung. And for me, Sanskrit is to be sung. It is definitely to be spoken, but it's a language. This is the beauty, and this is why I say it's an artistry. The language of Sanskrit is music. To me, they're not different. If you tap into the rhythm and the beauty of that language, it's vibrations of music, and that's why I feel it has the power to go to your heart and soul, because it's not really words anymore, it's music. And so that's why I loved that name Gaiea, and then it meant I could be just the one who sings. That's it. It's not the other person.
So tricky question perhaps. These days there's the idea that if you're not of a culture, then you don't have a sort of right to be a mouthpiece for it, or to sort of appropriate it in some way. As your kind of as your audience grows and your the sound that you're putting out into the world goes further and more people hear it, I wonder, do you have any sort of feedback of a response, a sort of judgment to what you're doing, and how do you approach that whole question?
It's a great question. So I feel it's one I've grappled with myself, but all I know is that there's something in me that is so clear, with there being a need for me to do this, that there are times when that question just doesn't come up for me. Like the clarity of direction is too, it's too clear for there to be doubt. But obviously I want to engage with the people who listen, especially people I know in India who listen, and I really wish to respect this ancient culture which India has been custodian of. So in that sense, that's where I feel like a child. I know it's my duty, if I am in any way a mouthpiece for a culture, but in that sense I feel nowhere near qualified to be such a person. But if I was to be, I feel it's my duty as far as I can to study and practice and learn to such a way that I can be a master, an expert. And that's a long journey, but it's my duty to be dedicated to it in that sense. And how I would respond to it being possibly a tricky thing, to be like a mouthpiece for another culture that I'm not a part of, is I feel the culture that is present in the Sanskrit language is so universal in and I know it might be easy to say that, and that's a whole other discussion, like how is it universal, but I know it is universal, and therefore it's something that truly transcends boundaries. And I've experienced taking a yoga class, for instance, and I'll play the group of students a Sanskrit chant at the end of the yoga class when they're in Shavasana. And some people may never have heard any Sanskrit before. And these are people from countries all over the world, London, a cosmopolitan city, people in London. And I've had people come up to me at the end and say, whatever that was playing there, I recognise it. And therefore, that's how I know. I haven't had that experience or come across it in many other places, but when it comes to Sanskrit. So that's another element. And the third thing that comes in answer to your question relates back to becoming hopefully more of an expert in it, as best as I can possibly be, to really respect the great teachers from India, the masters of this sound, this language, and learn from them. Is that I have friends who are classical musicians and pop musicians and opera singers and painters and sculptors and jewelers and poets and artists. And I know that, so let's take a friend who sings Mozart and Handel. So she has practiced those operatic arias for hours and hours and spent so many years of training to get to the point where she can stand on a stage and express that Handel and Mozart, and it's exquisite. And I feel the same with me. If I'm putting in those hours, putting in that training, then anyone from anywhere can express this Sanskrit. Just like anyone from anywhere can sing that Mozart aria. You don't have to be from the land where Mozart was born to be justified in singing that Mozart aria. You don't have to be from England to be justified in speaking the Shakespeare speeches. These great cultural masterpieces are available to us all, but for me to show respect to this cultural masterpiece, which in this conversation is Sanskrit, I need to put that dedication, like all artists, that's why I'd call it an art, of hours and hours and hours of time, energy and practice. And for me it goes beyond the hours, it becomes life itself. It's like you said at the beginning, there is then no separation, and that might seem an unhealthy thing, not for an artist, not to separate their life from their art, but I mean it has to be part of the fabric of my existence in some way for me to then be able to give it in a way I can feel valid in a way.
I suppose, like you said, what you know, teach, but don't pass it on if you don't know it.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Cool, great. Thanks for your time. It's been so interesting to speak to you. I've been wanting to do this for a little while. Where can people find you online?
So people can find these chants on youtube.com/Gaiea, G-A-I-E-A, Sanskrit, S-A-N-S-K-R-I-T, and also the same name you can find on Instagram, Facebook, and also a website on the same name. And gradually I'm sort of branching out into some more albums which will be just released under the name
Spotify.
Gaiea. Spotify.
On Spotify.
Well. Yes.
Neither Kinchit. That's my favourite. Check that out. We'll put the link in the caption accompanying this video as well. But Gaiea, thank you very much for your time. What a great conversation.